Hello, my dear students. Hope all of you are good and fine. Let's resume and let's figure out and know more incidents about chapter 12, which is entitled A Fatal Attraction. How about the setting? We are in London in 1792, and just simply 3 years had passed. Second, we're going to go to Tellison Bank, and of course Tellison Bank in which branch in England, London, not in France. And we're going to go to Dr. Manette's lodging in Soho Square. How about the main incidents or main events or main ideas of the chapter? First of all, we have a dialogue between Charles Darnay and Mr. Lorry inside Tellison Bank in London. Second, we have Mr. Lorry's strong reasons for traveling to Paris. And then we're going to have Gabel's letter. Who is Gabel? Gabel, he used to be the servant of the Marquis. Gabel, who was the one who was like we call a tax collector, someone who was in charge of collecting taxes from the poor class. Gabel was the same person when the Marquis had been murdered by Gaspard, as we all know. Charles Darnay left Gabel in charge of the chateau, the lands, the properties of France, and he gave him clear imperative forms, clear instructions, clear orders, never to collect rent or taxes anymore from the poor class. And we're going to have Darnay's decision to save Gabel, and we have like two notes or two messages left by Charles Darnay. One will be for Lucy Manette and the other will be for Dr. Alexander Manette. Let's elaborate each and every point. 3 years of tempest. Tempest, I mean the French Revolution, the anger, passed. And little Lucy, who's little Lucy simply? Yes, little Lucy, she was the daughter of Darnay as well as Lucy Manette. She was about 9 years old. The French Revolution succeeded in removing the royalty and aristocracy from power. No more king of France, no more queen of France. Simply the power all goes to who? To the jacks. France was still unsettled. Why? Because still we have a lot of bloody actions. However, many members of the French, of the upper classes, who had fled like when just ran away, escaped, who had fled to England, used Tellison Bank as their favorite meeting place. Tellison Bank, in England. Lucy, she still listened to the echoes in the corner, the echoing footsteps of people who change into wild beasts, like monsters. Okay, one afternoon at Tellison Bank, of course in England, Darnay and Mr. Lorry discussed what Mr. Lorry's impend, it means approach or about to happen. His own trip to where? To France, which means that Mr. Lorry, because of some urgent reasons, he had to travel from England, going to where? To France. Where in France? In Tellison Bank in France. Why? Simply why? You're going to ask yourself why. I'm going to tell you why. Because he would manage, Mr. Lorry, Tellison's Paris office, Tellison Bank in Paris, and tried to rescue some property and papers for Tellison customers. Okay, let me elaborate more. They were afraid that the angry jacks and the mob in France, they might just do what? They might enter by force, okay, like assault by force, Tellison Bank in France, and they might destroy it or destroy the documents of the customers. So that's why they had to send someone from Tellison Bank in England to make sure that these documents are completely guarded, okay, or hidden in a good place. And of course, that person will be simply Mr. Lorry. Charles Darnay, because he was, let's say, he cared too much for Mr. Lorry, he tried to do what? Tried to put him off, okay? Tried to tell him not to go, not to travel to where? To France. How can he convince him? Simply by listing some kind of clear, apparent reasons. He said, Mr. Lorry shouldn't go to France because, let's say, number one, Paris at that time, it was a disorganized city, lacking safety, lacking security. It was a long destination going from England to France. And because of the unchangeable weather. Okay? Of course, would you imagine that Mr. Laurie, that kind of a good person, rational, wise, witty person, would ever listen to Darnie's advice? Of course, no. Why? Is it because he's stubborn? He's as tough as old boots? No. Simply because he had a great sense of duty and obligation. So Darnie's efforts went in vain, okay? As Mr. Laurie was greatly driven by a great sense of what? Of duty and obligation. Laurie decided to travel to France accompanied by Jerry Cruncher, his own assistant. So he was doing that simply for the sake of Tellison Bank. So Mr. Laurie, he would travel from where to where? He's going to travel from England to France. When they were talking in Tellison Bank, an official, like someone high in rank in Tellison Bank, in England, he approached Mr. Laurie's desk. And that person, he had like a letter, like a note. That note was addressed, let's say like the address itself, to the Marquis of Evermond of France. No one inside the bank knew or discovered the person to whom this letter was addressed. They couldn't figure out who was the new Marquis. All of us will know quite well that the new Marquis is Charles Darnay, okay? The people in Tellison Bank started to to say some comments about the new Marquis. Who's the new Marquis? He is Charles Darnay. And they were unaware that they were speaking or talking about Charles Darnay, okay? Darnay offered, okay, to deliver the letter to the Marquis. He said, Mr. Laurie, that Marquis, he is one of my friends. Give me the letter and I'm going to give it to him. So Mr. Laurie, because he had a great confidence in Charles Darnay, he gave him the letter. Darnay, he took that letter and he went outside the bank, outside Tellison Bank in England. He was completely alone and he opened the letter. The letter was sent to him by who? By Gabelle. Okay, let's see what was inside the letter. Here it is. When Darnay read the letter, he was troubled to find that it was from who? It was from Gabelle. Gabelle had been imprisoned for acting for serving or for being Darnay's servant. Feeling guilty about Gabelle's imprisonment, okay, and about leaving some matters unfinished, Darnay himself decided to save Gabelle. How can he save Gabelle? Yes, by traveling to France. Let's figure out what was written inside Gabelle's letter. Gabelle, in the letter, he said that he had been seized, captured, arrested, and he was brought to a prison in Paris. And that prison, it has the name of Prison of Abbaye. By the way, girls and boys as well, in France, I have a lot of prisons. I have a prison called La Force, prison of called the Bastille that we all know it, and also prison called what? Abbaye. So the mob, let's say, or the jacks, they seized Gabelle in a prison called Abbaye. Okay, he said Gabelle in the letter that he would have a trial and surely he would be sentenced to death. He would lose his life. What was Gabelle's crime? Gabelle said in the letter that his crime was treason, that he was like a traitor, simply because he was serving Charles Darnay, who was considered as an immigrant. The angry mob, okay, didn't listen to him. Listen to who? To Gabelle. When Gabelle tried to defend Charles Darnay and clearing his master's reputation, they never listened to him, by the way. Gabelle mentioned that he received orders from Darnay never to collect taxes again. He ended his letter by begging Charles Darnay to help him. Here is the prison of Abbaye. Here are just two photos for the prison. Take a look. Okay, Darnay was inspired by Mr. Laurie's bravery and his sense of duty and obligation. So he resolved. What do you mean by resolved? Like he made up his mind. He decided to go to France. Okay, why France? To save who? To save Gabelle, his servant. Okay, he even imagined that he might be able, that's because Darnay was a very good person, someone who has a great character, okay? Darnay believed that he might be able to calm some of the angry mob and jacks. Consequently, he wrote two letters explaining the situation to Lucy, his wife, and Dr. Manette, and then departed, he left for France alone. In Lucy's letter, he explained his strong sense of duty to go to Paris, like he had to go. He had no choice. And he felt confident that he wouldn't face any trouble ever. As for Dr. Manette's letter, he entrusted Lucy, okay, and his dear child, little Lucy, to his care of who? Of Dr. Manette, and promised to send letters to prove his safety immediately after his arrival. Let me ask you, all of you, do you imagine that Darnie will be able to save Gabel? Okay? Do you assume that Darnie was a good person by taking that or making that kind of decision to go to France to save Gabel, his servant? Can you just imagine the journey for Darnie from going to England, leaving England and going to France? And one more question as well. I said that Gabel, he was in prison, right? And he sent a letter to Charles Darnie. If you just imagine, of course, that kind of a letter was like a trap. A trap for who? For Charles Darnie. Because in chapter 8, if you remember, Madame Defarge, she said that if Darnie's fate was to come to France, he will come to France. And if he comes to France, that will be his end. So that's why she was searching for like a reason, a trap, to let Darnie leave England and go to France. That trap for him, it was Gabel's letter, because they knew that Darnie was a gallant, he was a true man, okay? He was a real man. And once he would receive that letter of Gabel, he himself would decide to travel to France to save Gabel. He left the 2 letters with a trusty porter, Charles Darnie, to be delivered half an hour before midnight. If we need to, let's say, analyze Darnie's character, mention some adjectives about him, okay, I would say that he proved, Charles Darnie, to be gallant, like he's a true man, okay, who faced a lot of difficulties, okay, with high spirit. He was devoted, loyal to his family. His sense of responsibility, okay, forbade, the past of forbidden, forbade him to turn his back on Gabel or on his country. He had a strong feeling of duty and obligation, commitment, okay. Additionally, also, moreover, Darnie remained unaware of some of the dangers, such as Madame Defarge register knitting, awaiting him. He had no idea that his name, as we said before in chapter 8, she knitted his name, do you remember that part, beside the name of who? Of Jean Versat. So which means that Darnie's life is going to be in great danger if he ever stepped inside France. You're going to see. Because why? Because he renounced, he gave up his property and his name, title, being the new Marquis. He just imagined, or he just thinks of himself as a common man, okay? He didn't realize, however, that we said before, it comes from the word what? Revolution. So we call it revolutionaries. And who's that person? He's a person who revolts. That kind of people in France still viewed him, still regarded Darnie as the Marquis of Saint-Evremont. They regard him that he is the new Marquis and a French aristocrat who deserve to die. Okay? Thank you all, my dear students, and wish you all best of luck.